If you're enjoying the Health Geeks Book Club podcast, we'd appreciate if you hit the subscribe button, leave a like, rating, or review, whichever your preferred podcatcher platform allows.
This edition of our podcast is brought to you by 360 Health and Well Balanced Nutrition.
Welcome to the Health Geeks Book Club podcast. Listen in as Kristen Norton and Eleanor Russell review all those great health and wellness books you've been wanting to read or you have read and want to talk about. Here's Kristen and Eleanor.
Hey everybody, we are back talking today about a book called Unwinding Anxiety. Fun fact, Eleanor, this author is from my hometown.
Oh, how wonderful. Did you know him? Or
No.
Did your families know each other?
Nope. So he's from
big
Indianapolis,
hometown.
Indiana.
Huge.
And I'm from the east side, and he's from, I think, the northwest side.
Fun fact.
But when I read Hometown of Indianapolis, I'm like, what? I had to Google it and look. So, fun fact about Dr. Judd is what he goes by. His full name is Judson Brewer. He's an MD, Ph.D. If you're listening, Lucy, he does have a TED Talk, so it's my business partner's favorite thing is TED Talks. His TED Talk is called A Simple Way to Break a Bad Habit. But today we're talking about, what is the full title? Unwinding Anxiety.
Yeah, the new science shows how to break the cycles of worry and fear to heal your mind. And this guy's got some credentials. He's an MD, PhD, and he's internationally renowned, and he's an addiction psychiatrist and neuroscientist. He's got impeccable credentials from Brown University, and seems like he has a couple of other places he's been. He's been very active, worked with Olympic athletes, coaches, government officials, and his first book was called The Craving Mind, From Cigarettes to Smartphones to Love, Why We Get Hooked and How We Can Break Bad Habits. And it's been published in 15 languages, so people are reading it. And some of the people that are reading it, I have read their books. B.J. Fogg is a Ph.D., and he had on the jacket cover of the book, he has an endorsement. He talks about habits and tiny habits. Have you read that book?
Yes, that's a big one at Well Balanced Nutrition.
Yeah. So we might have to bring that one in as a classic because I love that book. It's a good thought provoker. And the other one is Kelly McGonigal. You know, we had her, isn't she the Wellness Instinct? I mean, the Willpower Instinct.
Yeah.
Yes. And so she endorses this one. So when I saw that, I thought, yeah, we want to read this guy. Since he's from Indianapolis, it's a good idea.
So his work really reminded me of Dr. Fogg. What does he say in his endorsement?
He says, one of the hardest things about tackling a bad habit is confronting the anxiety behind it. Judson Brewer has given us a breakthrough program with great tips and hacks that anyone can use to feel better. We all need this book.
Cool. Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
I agree.
Yeah, I liked this book.
And
I was not thinking I was going to like it. I kind of put it off, and then I went, oh, this is good.
His tips are realistic, and so I did the Audible version, and he was really easy to listen to. So I enjoyed that. And I also found myself wishing I had the book so I could highlight some of the fabulous things he was saying because I wouldn't remember just listening.
Yeah. Did you, since you were listening to it, did you also listen to the TED Talk?
I did.
I did too. And having read the book and then listening to that was some of the jewels that come out of this book. So those of you out there that might not want to read the book, I would recommend the TED Talk.
It's a good, quick summary, but it is also missing a lot of the good.
Oh God, the stories in here are just the best.
Yeah,
and the way he weaves his story together is very helpful. He has all sorts of organization in the book that we might talk about them, and it's. I love the fact that it is dedicated to the Amazon addict, and that I saw that and I went, no, that's weird, you know. And then did you see that on the Audible?
No.
Okay, and he comes back at the end and he says, you may have noticed that I dedicated this book to the Amazon addict because my wife knows I love her. I don't need to dedicate a book to her for her to know I love her. Oh, you sweetheart. And then he does go on and give her some credit in the acknowledgments. But this Amazon addict, he talks about we are primed for the age of addiction. And it scared the bejesus out of me when I actually focused on that, because I have had that in my head and not so clearly identified as an age, but we're teed up for creating more anxiety and more anxiety and more anxiety with this technology that we've embraced so wholeheartedly. And I know in some of my business practices, I'm encouraged to be even more engaged in it. And as a health advocate, I know it's not good for me. And when I read these books, I'm encouraged that, yeah, I'm right. It's not good for us, at least at the excesses that we are finding ourselves doing. So I'm going to look for a quote in here. Did that provoke an idea from you, Kristen?
Yeah, I wanted to share the notes that I wrote on that. He says the modern world is designed to capitalize on reinforcement learning. And that's what he goes into, and calls it a dangerous formula for modern day habits and addictions beyond what we might think of addictions as substance abuse. But we can get addicted to these little things, these habits. And the reinforcement learning he talks about is like anything unexpected will dial up your dopamine hits more than something expected. And so think about your cell phone alerts, right? It's a new email, it's a new house on the market, maybe it's a text, but you get excited because that is unexpected. And then the other part of modern world that is set up for addiction is immediate reward. So he gives the example of if you wanted to buy shoes in the 1800s, you got to get on your wagon, go to town, tell them what size, get your shoes measured. That goes out to a cobbler?
Mm-hmm.
And then you go back home, wait a couple weeks, you finally get your shoes, you hope they fit. And all the excitement wears out by that time. And nowadays, everything is available. And I've noticed this lately because I'm doing a little bit of redecorating in my house. And so I'll walk down the hallway and be like, oh, I need that. Let me get on my phone, get on Amazon, and then it's at my doorstep in 2 days.
Exactly.
Or less.
Yeah. Like these books I order come the next day.
So he says time is critical to allow that initial urge to wash away, but we never have that time anymore because everything is available at our fingertips. Mm-hmm. And he calls our phones just a walking advertisement for us.
Oh, yeah, and it talks about the Facebook or social media people that designed the first platforms. Their intent was to get us to spend as much focus and time on that so the advertisers could pay their money.
Yes, and there's a really good documentary about that.
What's the name of that one?
Tim, can you help us out? What's the name of that?
Yeah, it was about the social dilemma or something like that.
That's what it's called.
Yeah, social dilemma.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it'll make you ill because these are the fellows that were so creative and had such good ideas about what social media could do for us, but the flip side of the coin is very dark, and we're experiencing some of that now. Before we start talking about anxiety, maybe we ought to define what it is.
Yeah.
Because we're going to unwind anxiety and break those cycles of worry and fear. So early in the book, he decides that he'll give us an online dictionary, since we're online already. Anxiety as a feeling of worry, nervousness, or unease, typically about an imminent event or something with an uncertain outcome. This encompasses, just about anything, since any event that is about to happen is imminent, and the only thing we can be certain about is that the things are uncertain. Anxiety can rear its head in just about any place, any situation, or any time of day. And that's what so many people are experiencing.
And they don't realize it either.
I don't think I did.
And he tells his story of how, was it at Princeton? He was in all of these different clubs.
The overachiever.
He was the ultimate overachiever.
And he went to Princeton just because his mother said you can't get in.
Yes.
And so he applies, he gets in, and he's never seen the campus and goes. Now, this is an overachiever.
Yes. And he is in all the things and
the band,
run club.
Mm-hmm.
And then he realizes he has, speaking of GI, we talked about GI distress on the last podcast.
Yeah.
And at Well Balanced Nutrition, we focused in April, but he had some GI issues and went to the doctor, and they're like, do you think you have some stress or
Oh,
worry,
no, he
anxiety?
thought he had giardia because he'd been out in the canoes in the the outdoor club,
Right, it could not be
No,
anxiety.
he drank some water that had some, bacteria in it, and nobody else in the group got sick, but he got sick, and he knew, and he had the diagnosis all lined up because he Googled it. He knew more than the doctor.
Well, that was before Google, he said.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
But he was in med school or whatever.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he didn't know about it. And a lot of times we don't realize it.
No, and his doctor was pretty clever because he gave him a prescription for an antibiotic for the infection that he knew wasn't there, which, we should ding the doctor about because we shouldn't write antibiotic prescriptions when there isn't an infection.
Right.
But it helped this fella figure out, oh, it really isn't an infection. Maybe I have a problem. And that's what I like about the author. He's very self-revealing. And he talked about, I have too many degrees, I have too many books, I've written too many papers. It's like I'm excessive about this.
Have you looked at his website?
No.
He's got some cool resources on his website, and he's done some really great, what do I want to say, public-facing research. And now those have turned into apps that you can buy and you can participate in that has scientific evidence to back it up, which is really cool. So
yeah, which is kind of what I was going to say about the organization of the book. He starts out with part 0.
Yeah.
What? I've never seen a book that has a nothing area.
Easy killer.
And it's this new studio. It's moving. He says we have to get some background first, and then he moves into part 1, and he has this analogy of what he's going to explain to us on how we can control our minds a little more, or understand our minds, or understand how our brain works to be able to help it feel better and serve us better. So he does this car analogy of when you're starting an engine, and if it's not an automatic engine, you shift gears when you get into a certain speed, and then you shift gears again. And he said he had a mountain bike, I believe. When you're going up the hill, it's got 20 speeds, and you use all of them. Getting up the hill, you're on first speed, I guess, and then going down the hill, you use the other one so that you can maximize each pedal turn and go further. So he's built his book on first gear, which is mapping your mind, and then second gear, which is updating your brain's reward value, and then third gear is finding that bigger, better offer for your brain. And I thought, well, that's kind of an interesting organization here. So as you mentioned, that positive reinforcement, there's also negative reinforcement. So that idea of the way our brain makes sense of our world is it gets information, and then it integrates it, and there's a response. So there's a trigger, a behavior, and a result or a reward. And we've read that in other books, and we're reading it in more books now, I think.
Right. And that's what the Tiny Habits is all about, is recognizing that trigger, behavior, and reward. But in Gear 1, where he has you map your mind, he really emphasizes how much time he wants you to spend here, and just awareness, like a scientist. Notice all of those loops that you're going through, and how that loop can lead into another loop and then another loop, and you're mapping your mind. He does have on his website Map My Habit, like a printout or a template that I want to go check out where you can.
Yeah, I think I'm going to do it.
Yeah,
because I did a couple of his little things in here. He talked about the success of his work is because it's based on science. And that's what you were saying about his website. He has a depth of scientific investigations from many different perspectives that all kind of come to the same conclusion that this works. And he said that he has gotten a 40% reduction in craving-related eating and a 63% reduction in generalized anxiety problems. And that's huge. And I believe he does say that he believes his technique is more effective than cognitive-based therapy. Now, I want to get Cyrus Bush back here about the science of tapping, because that was one of the things we read about that modality as well, is it seems to be producing better results that last longer with less effort and using the natural body. instead of interventions with pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
All the time. I mean, they're not saying that those things are not necessary, but they're saying they may not need to be used as extensively as they are, or as a first line, or whatever.
Yeah, as a dietitian, I was really wanting to get a sneak peek or a behind-the-scenes view on the he's got the anxiety and then the, I guess, emotional eating app. It's called Eat Right Now. And he says it's scientifically proven to reduce craving-related eating by 40%. So I'm like, let me in. I want to see what they're doing in there.
Is something called Noom saying the same thing?
Oh, don't get me started
Okay,
down that route.
on a chit-chat, we're going to come back to that one.
Yes.
Oh, but the other thing is that America is anxious compared to other countries. We have a huge anxiety problem in this country. 80% of us are anxious. 68% are extremely anxious, particularly focused on health and safety. And 67% of us are anxious about finances. So that's a lot of people carrying some stress.
Yeah, it was interesting. He had a theory on why in America, when we have all the things that we do, we're so anxious. And didn't he tie it back to Maslow's theory of, we've got the safety needs met, we've got the housing met, so now we have other things to worry about.
Yeah, we got to worry. We can't not worry.
Yeah, I don't know.
But
Interesting.
But then the partner to anxiety is depression.
Yeah.
So they go hand in hand. And then you throw the COVID epidemic in, because this book was published. It was released in 2020, right? Or no, 2021. Do you remember? 2021. So very current. And he did talk about the COVID epidemic layering another level of anxiety. And that's something that, coming out of that pandemic, many people are concerned about what's happened to children, their perspective on the world, their relationships with their parents, watching their parents feel anxious, and then the work climate has changed and people have lost jobs, people have been excluded based on their decisions on, therapies. So there's a lot of anxiety about what do I do?
Yeah, it's hard to find someone who wouldn't benefit from this book, huh?
I agree.
This hit home for me because he has, as being in the medical field, he has performed some research on busy doctors who, are kind of having to deal with the system, wanting them to always be seeing more clients and hitting these benchmarks and not really allowing them to have moments of self-care. And he even mentions, you aren't even expected to have to go to the bathroom because you are always taking care of other people. And we think a lot about how nurses are like that. They're very giving, but I don't think it gets talked about or thought about how much doctors are in that, especially through their training.
We tried, when I was involved in the education of those professionals, I kept thinking, is there a way that we could build this curriculum around biological rhythms, because we know that in the middle of the afternoon cortisol levels drop and all this kind of stuff and fatigue sets in. But no, we just push on through. We just keep layering it. And we know that they have to know all this stuff, so we got to cram it in their brains. And it's so unreasonable what we do. But if we didn't do it that way, it would take 20 years to get the education completed.
Yeah.
So it's a real conundrum of, how do we accomplish the skill level that we need and not kill these people while we're doing it? Because this is supposed to be healthcare, and we're killing these people training them to be healthcare providers.
Well, the system definitely needs some updates, but one cool thing is his research or his approach with these doctors. So 60% of them had anxiety in the group that he did, and after 3 months of using his mindfulness app, they reduced their anxiety by 57%.
Isn't that wonderful?
And they didn't have to change the system. So I do think the system needs to be changed, but we could also teach them this mindfulness.
Yeah, well, that would be part of the change in the system, is introduce things that are tools for them, given what we know is going to be stress.
Here's another cool thing from it. So after doing that smaller study with the busy doctors, then he had some NIH funding to open this study up to the general community with generalized anxiety, and they reduced their anxiety levels by 63%.
It's big.
It's big. And so he was like, well, how big is that? And he goes into the number needed to treat.
Yes.
Which is abbreviated NNT. And for anxiety and depression medications, the number needed to treat is 5.15. So what that means is you need to give just over 5 people the medication to see the effect in one of them.
Exactly.
And his, based on the study, using the app, his NNT was 1.6.
Mm-hmm.
So in his words, more people would win the lottery with the same ticket with his mindfulness app. So that's really intriguing.
Those are numbers that are attention grabbing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say pay attention to those, and why wouldn't you try this? And what's it going to hurt? The guides that he's giving us, if they actually worked, they're so simple.
Right.
It's like, let's just do this. Let's just make it complicated. I like the biology stuff, so I'm going to go back there a little bit too. We talk about the reactive brain.
Yes.
That is, as he says, very quick. And the thinking brain is very slow in comparison. And what happens with the reactive brain is you get an input signal and an output signal rather quickly. So if you hear a big boom, your muscles clench, your eyes flash, your muscles tighten up, whatever. And you don't think that through. That happens. That's a reaction.
Instantly, yeah.
And so what you learn is there's a connection from that reactive brain to the higher cerebral centers or brain centers, and they call it the prefrontal cortex. And then there are areas deeper in that cortical area called the cingulate gyrus that have some places that will light up. He's done these studies with PET scans and MRIs, and he's not just talking. He's actually saying, I've looked at what's going on with the tools that we have today to say where are these cells active. That means they're firing. That means they're talking to each other, they're making neurochemicals that come out and talk to the other one. And so when you have the brain in the reactive mode, it knows what's going to happen because the first time it experiences something, it assesses the context and then chunks that all together and stores it in memory. So you have the trigger and what was happening around the trigger all kind of in a picture snapshot in your memory bank. Then your higher centers can say, do I need to respond to that or not? If you hear a big bang, you don't have to fall on the floor. We read about the fellow that had post-traumatic stress syndrome in the tapping book, and he was walking with his girlfriend and a car backfired and he hits the floor, and is just in a terrible physiological state.
Wait, was that tapping or what happened to you?
I think it was, well, I'm not sure, but I thought it was tapping because I thought they taught him how to tap through that.
They all blend together after
they
a little
might,
bit.
Yeah, but it is a trauma. But the idea then is you can train your brain, even though I hear that sound, it's the backfire, I'm not in war, this is not the same year, this is 10 years later. You have that ability to train your brain to, you talk to it and reinforce that positive loop. But what happens is if you get stuck up there with uncertainty and you don't know what's going on, your reactive brain takes care of it, and you're up there in your higher centers trying to figure out what's going on, and it just compounds, and you get that fight or flight or freeze reaction when you don't necessarily need to do that. And that's what happens to people in anxiety. When there's no need to worry for the rest of us, they're sitting there just either traumatized, paralyzed and can't do anything, can't get out of bed because they think the world's going to end. And so that whole idea of the connections in the brain, that when we have uncertainty and we perseverate in that idea, then the reaction that we're programmed to at a baser level will occur.
Right. I think what you just described was the anxiety habit loop.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah,
How
clarify that, since I did it in very awkward terms.
No, it was great. But so in my mind, I'll try to simplify it. So he says that anxiety can be a habit loop because let's say you get stressed or anxious about something, and that launches you into a behavior. And that behavior often is problem solving, that thinking through it.
Mm-hmm.
And then...
Yeah, thinking it.
And then sometimes that problem solving works and you find a solution and that makes you feel less anxious. So that's the reward. And because that sometimes happens, then your brain still stores that as, okay, let's solidify that as a loop.
Mm-hmm.
But we know that the problem solving, we can't always find a solution. So then it's this habit of, okay, I have stress and anxiety, then I'm going to problem solve, but there's no solution. So that makes me more stressed and anxious. And that's that loop of uncertainty and then stress and uncertainty and then stress. And sometimes the trigger doesn't even have to be stress or anxiety. It could be what he says, like a negative emotion. And then that leads into stress. And that's kind of all what he goes into with mapping your mind. It gets into these messy loops.
Yeah, except he sort of simplifies that down to, trigger, feel bad, behavior, do something.
Reward or response.
Feel better.
Yeah.
We all try to feel better. So if you have that woman, there are many things about the eating thing in there. You probably have examples too, where somebody's at work and they are talked over, their ideas are not given, so they come home and think about that. I didn't get to say what I wanted to say. I felt bad. Oh, but I remember something that makes me feel good. It's eating chocolate. So I'm going to go eat chocolate, and then I'm going to feel better for a minute. But then I ate too much chocolate. I feel bad. Now I feel awful. So I have to do something about that. I have to find a behavior to help that. And that's when you get stuck in, well, I'll eat a little more chocolate.
And that's another endless worry habit loop. So he's saying that our anxiety can show up as these bad habits because we're wanting to avoid the anxiety or the negative feelings.
Yeah. So what is gear number one? His first gear, as he said, is to map your own, right?
Map your mind. And then number two, I think you were getting into a little bit about update your brain's reward value, because weren't you saying that once that happens, it stores that information for later?
Mm-hmm.
And that makes me think of the birthday cake example. This is relative to what I do as a nutritionist, right? So our brains are operating on all these old habit loops. Once it's set and forget, then we no longer have to consider the details.
Exactly.
It just happens. But so birthday cake, you go to a birthday party when you're a kid and it's so much fun. You get to see all your friends, you're running around at the park, and then you happen to have birthday cake. And so it solidifies in your mind that was a really happy, positive experience. As a kid, you probably didn't get a tummy ache from it, and maybe you just got more energy from it. And and so that's stored as birthday cake is really good, and why would I not want that? And he goes on to say that behavior doesn't change unless the reward value changes. So your reward value is still high for birthday cake, even though as an adult, it really doesn't taste that great, and it makes you feel pretty crummy after you eat it. Yeah. And there's no really happy birthday party experience. Yeah, that comes with it.
So he says, after you map that out, you say, okay, here's a thing. I ate cake and I didn't want it, but I ate it anyway, and I didn't like how it made me feel. You map that out. Then the second thing, at second gear, is you ask yourself, what do I get from this? And it's a pausing, because he says your brain is slow. It's a stinking thinking, and it's the weakest part of the loop. So when you stop yourself and say, well, what do I get from this? It causes that connection then of the override to get in connection with that reaction habit that you've got. And usually you'll say, well, I got calories that I didn't want. I got a stomach ache I didn't want. I got a headache.
He really likes the word curious. He wants you to get curious.
I want to get into that in third gear.
But yeah, so you get curious, and then what he says is you're eventually disenchanted with the behavior because you're sitting in it, you're gathering that new information about it, right? So, it turns out birthday cake isn't really that great. I love the example of smoking that he uses, that mindful smoking is like cat pee and chemicals.
We read that book too about nosedive. Curiosity. Can we talk there?
Yeah, let's go in.
Yeah, he brought some new ideas because I like curiosity. I feel like I'm a curious person. Interested in how things work and who you are and what you've done and all that kind of stuff. If you are interest curious, that's different from deprivation curious. He kind of teased them apart. When you're interest curious, you have an open body, and when you're deprivation, you have a closed, pulled-in body. And it's sort of like in deprivation, the destination is thirst. It's down at that baser level, and when you're in the interest area, it's based on the journey, and so it's open instead of closed, and it all is based on this reward-based learning thing, because you have a gap in information, a need to know, and that's the curiosity. It's an itch that's got to be scratched, and
is that where he goes into the personality quiz?
He might have on it was just after that, I think, where he talks about. Did you take it? The behavior. He called it behavior tendencies quiz.
Behavior tendencies, whether you tend to
approach, avoid, or go with.
Right, and that can help you understand your habits and how habits form for you. I was kind of in between the second and third one. I can't remember, but that's available online too,
yeah.
I believe.
Yeah, it's definitely a fun thing to do, and he does develop that idea. What do I get from this?
But he says that curiosity feels good, and it can, if I interpreted it right, it can soothe the anxious feelings if you can pause and get curious, because
Absolutely.
Curiosity feels good. You're discovering something.
And that's a positive reinforcement.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was cool.
It is. And then he talks about that area between comfort and danger. And there's a place in between there called growth. And it's in that area that curiosity allows that growth mindset. And he keeps referring to Carol Dweck, Dweck, and her work on mindset, which I enjoyed a lot. But that third gear, then, you say, second gear, first gear, you map it. Second gear, you say, what am I getting from this? And listen to yourself. And you listen to yourself. And then the third gear, he gives you tools like breathing. Anchor to the present. Come here right now and say, okay, what does my chest feel like? What does, my, am I feeling this somewhere?
Right. What sensations are coming up when I feel anxious?
That's news for a lot of us. I don't think a lot of us have ever stopped to really, until you get into mindfulness training or exercises. And he says he took 10 years before it kind of made sense to him. I think you can do it a little quicker than that.
Hopefully.
Yeah, I hope so. But the idea is the weapon of mass distraction is what this third gear is. You got to distract yourself from that habit loop that's no good, that's not serving you. And he has a practice called RAIN, where you stop, you recognize or relax what is arising. You accept and allow it to be there. You investigate the bodily sensations, like I was just talking about. Where am I feeling this? What are my emotions, or what am I thinking? Do I even have a thought? Am I thinking? That's an okay assessment. And then note what's happening. And that becomes what I would say is the focus on self-awareness. Becoming self-aware of where we are and what's going on. And that observer effect is something that my son and I talked about maybe 3 years ago, because he was really, really interested in some really good physics lectures at a high level. And he was telling me reality's not real because it all depends on the observer. And so this thing called the observer effect, and he's maybe right, because they, in physics, say observing changes the phenomena being observed, which is beyond my grasp, except when you bring it into this mindfulness context.
It makes more sense.
It does. It's, what is reality? Well, if I follow it this way and not think about it, that's what's going to happen. If I stop myself and say, what am I seeing? What do I, is this what I want? Just stop. It might not happen. And that changes reality.
Yeah, and with noting reality. I like how he reminds us that just doing that really small moments multiple times a day will help us to get to that awareness point where we are aware. We can put the time between the urge and the reaction, and then we can maybe use our thinking mind a little bit, or we can break that habit loop with the, what does he say, bigger, better offer for your brain.
Yes, and so for my procrastination problem with getting my taxes ready, if I had just stopped and said, I notice I'm not doing this. What am I getting out of this? Well, I'm getting more anxious because it's not getting done. That kind of thing. I might have a fine to pay if I don't get this done. And then the idea of what do I feel like? What am I feeling? It probably would have been nice for me to go through this exercise sooner than later. But you said something about thinking it through. He says that why question is where so many of us get stuck. Is like, why am I having so much trouble getting ready for my taxes? I'm a smart woman. I should be able to do that. What's wrong with me? There's something wrong with me. And then I try to figure out why. He says, forget it. Why is not important. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh, is that liberating?
Yeah, he calls out the why and then the fixing, right?
Yes.
As soon as you map your mind or whatever, then you want to fix it right away. And that's another loop that you can fall into.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because every step of the way he's like, okay, you've got this little piece of the puzzle, but be careful because that could fall into another bad habit loop. And when you're building your bigger, better offer for your brain, you want to ask yourself, does this step out onto a different path, or does it just feed your habit loop, whether the old one or a new bad one? So tons and tons of great little
Do you like the
tricks
book?
and hacks. I do like the
Did you
book.
like the way he talked?
Yes.
I thought he was very, you heard him talk, and I listened to him through the words on the page, and I thought it was very readable. I recommend this book. If you don't think you have a problem with anxiety, you might want to read it anyway because the people around you do, according to these statistics. And the only other thing I wanted to ask you is, he was really sort of saying put the cell phones away for a good deal of the time and use them when you need to use them. But then he built an app on a smartphone and wants you to be interrupted doing. And I thought, Can we reconcile this? And I think we can because I think it works.
Yeah. I think
it might be a good use for the cell phones.
I agree. Yeah, that's funny. But it's what we're already using.
Stop using it so much. But here, use this.
I know, because he says every time it beeps, do you want to look at it? And I have an addiction to mine. I have this. Well, I have an anxiety around it. Maybe I don't have an addiction. I don't know.
I think it was his way of, though, instead of bringing someone into a workshop, a mindful-based learning, goes right where they're already at and what they're already checking.
Mm-hmm. Do you use any of that technology in your practice?
What technology?
Is it like the
we
apps?
have an app. Yep, we have an app that we can communicate with our clients, and they can take pictures of their food and send it to us. So, yeah, we're right there with them on the app, and we're, the Health Geeks. We're on Facebook and social media. So it's a love-hate relationship with the phone.
Well, there we go. All right, folks, I'm going to try to do the first gear, second gear, third gear. I'll be reporting back in a sit chat sometime.
That sounds great. I will commit to doing the same.
Oh, I'm Eleanor at 360health4u.com, and I'm helping you make healthy happen because I'm reading all these books and I can tell you about them.
Right.
And I'm Kristen Norton, one of the registered dietitians at Well Balanced Nutrition. Visit our website at wellbalancednutrition.com and see how you can connect with us and set up a free consult so we can go into healthy lifestyle habits.
And opinions stated in this podcast are solely those of the contributors and are not necessarily those of our distributors or hosting company. This podcast is copyrighted, and no part can be reproduced without the expressed written consent of Kristen and Eleanor.